it's a lot of good stuff. I'd like to give, each of the four of you just to kind of just a moment to talk about what is one thing the company should be thinking about when it comes to costs, or one thing to be aware of, one thing to be maybe help them forecast, prevent some surprises. What's an important thing the company should keep in mind when they think about the costs of cloud computing? Ronnie, a sense of that? What do you tell people?
Expect it to be variable.
Mm-hmm.
My background is in traditional IT, and having shifted from doing multi-year budgeting and planning using traditional measures of having to expect capital expenditures to shifting to operational expenditures has been a pretty big shift, and that's something that on the consulting side or strategic advisory side of our customers, that's what we advise them to do there, is expect that change. It's easier relatively for the IT managers, the IT financial analysts, and then when you shift into the their financial services group in a company, accounting groups, and so on, it becomes a little bit more challenging to reconcile those costs. But the costs are going to be variable, and that is something to always maintain. But ultimately, those costs are only variable if you build applications to take advantage of the nature of cloud computing. If you're running static workloads, then you're going to get very predictable pricing.
You talked about the different departments. I think it was you that, it used to be the IT department carried all costs, and now maybe the marketing department has a line item for cloud computing. Maybe the human services department has a line item for cloud computing. It's that itself also adds to the confusion around the cost of cloud computing.
Indeed, if that sort of question is more of a follow-up for me, what becomes very different there is that all those costs, as you were mentioning, used to be contained within IT, and we're seeing it, and we hear it from a number of analysts and from a number of customers as well, that those costs are being distributed around the organization. So,
right.
How does a business keep track of their overall IT spend when their IT spend is no longer contained within IT is challenging, to say the least. There are obviously a number of solutions out there that facilitate that, but to gain insight into that is tools don't just do the job. It requires insight into what lines of businesses are actually doing to really understand what those costs are.
James, something you would tell to a company getting on board with cloud computing in terms of costs, and what should they be thinking about?
I think that first and foremost in your mind, whenever you're making any decision with respect to cloud, is the trade-off between the cost of implementing technical effort in the way that you configure something, and the value of the flexibility that if you go to the effort of being able to use more than one cloud provider, or being able to use either private cloud or public cloud, or not limiting yourself to within a certain latency, or not limiting yourself to only being in a particular jurisdiction. The more flexibility you have, the easier it is to find lower prices and basically monetize that flexibility. By way of example, there's a customer that we're working with at the moment that is running on two of the world's biggest major cloud providers. But they're just running, a Linux batch workload. They can run it anywhere globally. They have no constraints, and given 6 hours of notice, they can move that workload to run anywhere. So they're able to use private cloud that is underutilized. They're able to use Amazon. They're able to use Azure. They can use small cloud providers, big cloud providers. Does not matter where it is, and they're the ones that will get the cheapest price globally. Because yes, they happen to have a workload that doesn't have data gravity. It can be moved around easily. But they've invested in tools to be able to move it around with ease as well.
Are they actually moving it around on a regular basis? How often are they moving it? Just curious.
So at the moment, they're spread over 2 clouds, and they're basically working with us and a couple of other partners in order to find bids from providers all around the world, just classic cloud providers, but also people with spare capacity in private clouds that will offer them a really, really cheap deal, which is below the average cost of running the cloud, but above the marginal cost of running the cloud for a fixed term period. And basically, they'll be moving it around going forward. And that's the value of their flexibility for their particular use case.
Max, what do you tell people when they start to get on board with cloud computing? What's one thing they can think about in terms of costs?
Yeah, I really need to agree again with my previous speakers. I think the main point is decide what which of the applications can make use out of the flexibility you gain in the cloud, and then invest in making that the application makes use out of the flexibility by being able to run on different environments on different cloud providers, so you can work against their different price models, but also making use out of simple things like downscaling. Many people don't scale down; they scale up, but they don't scale down. So all these things, invest in the applications and make sure that they actually make use out of the capabilities of the cloud, and then I think most definitely you'll have a very powerful, very cheap runtime environment for your application.
But you're talking about downscaling. In other words, the company has bought too much capacity, and they need to monitor that on a regular basis and realize we have too much capacity. Is that what you mean by downscaling?
Yes, or they have they have a cluster of, I don't know, 100 systems, and they just don't have the load currently. So then run out some of those, the ones that they don't need. I mean, this is stuff that the right scale colleagues do out of the box, but I think many people don't implement it properly, and then they can't get the benefits. So they size like they used to size based on peak loads, and then you can't get the full benefit out of the cloud. So downscaling, many people care about upscaling because they think about their future business growing, but there are always peaks in terms of high peaks, and there are always lows, and you should make use out of the cloud also in these aspects.
Owen, what's the one thing that you say to people in terms of the cost of cloud computing? Having written your doctoral thesis on this, for goodness sakes, the pressure's on, I think.
Yeah, I suppose my insight would be that the cloud shouldn't just be assessed in terms of cost and in terms of cost reduction. For me, the real power of the cloud is the ability to attract new revenue streams, to grow and scale as business dictates, and to move into new markets quickly and easily, rather than the ability to necessarily cut costs per se. So, for example, if you have a website, an e-commerce application, if that suddenly scales because of an increase in demand, because someone is desiring a certain product from all over the globe, obviously costs then are going to increase. But as long as revenue is also increasing proportionately, then there's already a bigger profit being generated. So I think in the longer term assessment of moving to the cloud and working out if the cloud is a good move, it's far more important to consider all the new ways the business can profit than to just concentrate on cost alone.
And the problem, of course, becomes when a company wants to forecast its costs a year in advance, and it gives a certain department X amount of dollars for the year, and because of an on-demand situation, that company spends all its money in the first 60 days. Maybe it's made a lot of money doing that, but of course then there's 10 more months of the year. They've already spent most of their budget for the year.
And you would hope in that situation, if a sales department, for example, had spent all of its budget within the first month on supporting additional website demand, you would hope more budget would be able to be assigned to the sales department because they've demonstrated a certain growth in revenue as a result of an investment in the cloud.
So it's the company's budgeting has to be as flexible as the cloud itself, perhaps, in a perfect world.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way of putting it. And I hesitate to use the term game changer because I feel everything's a game changer at the moment. But I think cloud is an evolution of business to some degree. And I think a lot of things are going to need to change internally in organizations using the cloud to really get used to all the benefits it can offer.
It's going to be a process. All right, I thank you very much. A lot of good stuff. I will send you the link and we can all promote it and tweet it. Thank you very much.